great while, something happens in a campaign which reveals what the choice is. And I have to tell you, right before I came out at my last event, a man came up to me and he said, Mr. President, I want you to know something about the working people of Pennsylvania. We're not bitter about anything. We're proud, but we do want a better deal for the people of our country and for our children, and that's what Hillary wants to give you. I want to talk a little about this. We all know that the country's got some serious problems. But I want to, first of all, for the young people in this audience, tell you that you need not be too discouraged, and you don't have to despair. Years ago, when I was the age of a college senior today, when Dr. King was killed, Bobby Kennedy was in Indiana the next state after you in this vote. And it was the last time Indiana was important in the primary process. Bobby Kennedy gave a very moving speech of about 4 minutes. It was one of the most eloquent speeches in modern history, saying he knew what it was like to have someone in his family killed, and America had to turn away from violence and division and join together. And of course, 2 months and 2 days later, he was killed. I say that to remind the young people of this country that we've been through a lot of challenges. But it's always a mistake to bet against America. If we pull together and do the right things, we can always come back, and we can come back now. That's the problem in Iraq. They got to decide to make these hard decisions. You know, if your next door neighbor's house burned down and your neighbor had nowhere to go, you'd take your neighbor in, wouldn't you?
Yep.
It's the American way. Even if your neighbor had to sleep on the couch, you'd be okay. If your neighbor could stay a month, you'd never think a thing about it. Most of us will let our neighbor stay 6 months without thinking a thing about it. But if your neighbor is still on your couch after 5 years, what do you know? It's not about the fire anymore. It's about not having to get off your couch. And that's about where we are in Iraq. It is not about the fire anymore. Hillary gave us time to bring our soldiers home. I have a college roommate who was an Army veteran in Vietnam, whose son is a Special Forces, an Army Ranger, Sergeant. He's on his 5th tour, but he's young and single, and he wanted to go. And he's done a great job for us, and I get better briefings from his trips to Afghanistan than I could if I were still president reading what the CIA knew. But that's an exception. How are these kids going to preserve their families and raise their kids and do these things? This is a terrible strain on them. We have been there longer than we were in World War II. You have spent $600 billion. You will spend $1 trillion before it's over, just taking care of the health care problems that have been generated. We've lost 4,000 people. We have 70,000 wounded. Many of them have post-traumatic stress syndrome. Many of them have traumatic brain injuries. We don't even know how to treat some of them yet. Some of them will have their brains rewired, some won't. When these bombs blow up on the side of the road, if you're close enough, your brain will rattle around in your skull, and it can interrupt the networks that will let your brain operate on automatic. A few minutes, we'll leave here. Every one of you get out of here and not give a second thought to how you're going to get where you're going. Thousands of your fellow Americans can't do that anymore. Hillary met a young man a few months ago, she told me about, on one of her trips to Walter Reed Hospital, who said to her, Senator, and he was being fitted for a prosthesis. He lost his right arm below the elbow in one of these bombs. He said, Senator, don't you worry about my body. I went to West Point, I knew the risks, I'm on the serve. And my body's in much better shape than many people who've been wounded. But he said, I do need some help in getting my brain back. And she said, well, I don't understand. She said, we're having a great conversation. He said, yes, we are. And he said, if you'll stand right there, I can talk to you all day long about military history. But he said, I can't leave my house unless my wife writes down every single thing I have to do and directions about how to get back home. Now, we met a guy in Texas when we were campaigning there who'd been that way for 2 years, and he'd gotten his brain back. Through therapy, nobody knows whether he just learned it all again or whether his brain rewired itself and he got it back. You need a president who'll stay with those kids till they all get it back and they have the best life they can. Secondly, she was the first person running for president to recognize that you cannot get wages up in America unless there are more jobs in this economy. And she was the first person to say we got to have a strategic energy fund, because the only way we can get millions of jobs in a hurry is to say we're going to make America more energy independent through homegrown clean energy and energy efficiency, including clean coal for all of you wearing those caps. And she has proposed to take away these subsidies we should never have given the oil companies and the nuclear companies in the first place in that 2005 energy bill, and put them in a fund to pay to accelerate the development of homegrown American energy. Solar energy, wind energy, geothermal energy, clean coal, and biomass. Now, biomass is a fancy way of saying we could close every landfill in this country and make either biofuels or generate electricity out of it and put American people to work doing it and lower your energy bill. This is the only strategy that will create jobs in Carbon County, Jim Thorpe, every other small town, every rural county, every suburb, and every big city in America. And let me just back up and say here, you know, I'm not in politics except when I know somebody running for office. My life is my foundation work. I do this work all over the world. I am working in over 40 cities on 6 continents, proving the best way to fight global warming is to generate jobs through promoting energy independence. I don't work anywhere where people don't wind up better off. So I know that her energy plan will work. You just think about it. You can grow biofuels in every state in America. You can do it in Pennsylvania. You don't need to grow corn. That's the most expensive way to make biofuels. You use up farm crops, you use up farmland, you drive up the price of food. But you can take the leavings of every crop, the leavings of every timber cut, any kind of field that's open with grass, or as I said, urban landfills, and you can make biofuels. You know the greatest thing about it for a place like this? You can't travel with it. You cannot put it in a pipeline, which means if you do this, you have to have a new production facility every 100 to 150 miles. Now you think about how many places in Pennsylvania have had no new production jobs in 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We got to get rid of the tax breaks for the wealthiest people and the special interests, and give tax cuts to middle class people for education, for health care, for retirement, for caring for an elderly relative. We've got to change the whole shebang. You've got to have somebody who is oriented toward you, and you know, you don't have to worry, you know they've got a lifetime of making changes for other people. So if you want the best leader, if you want the person to be the best commander-in-chief, if you want somebody who will bring the middle class back, give poor people a chance again, and reclaim the future for our kids, she's your best choice. And don't you let anybody tell you she can't win. I'm going to tell you something. I have seen a number of Clinton's laws of politics manifest in the last few days. When somebody tells you that somebody else ought to get out of the race, it's because they're afraid they won't. When somebody tells you that somebody can't win, it's because they're afraid they will. You just remember this. She was outspent $4 million on television in Texas, and they were dancing and breaking out the champagne until the votes came in, and she carried 230 of 254 counties, places just like Carbon County, and she won anyway. She was outspent $2.5 million on television in Ohio until places like Jim Thorpe and Carbon County came in, and she won by 10 points anyway. In the first few weeks of this campaign, she was outspent 5-1 on television, but if you stick with her, she'll win anyway. Then she'll win in Indiana, and we'll roll through the rest of this primary. She'll be the nominee and the next president of the country, and she'll bring her home.